Welcome to Roadmaps and Roadblocks. I'm Beth Osborne, CEO and President of Smart Growth America.
And I'm Martha Roskowski with the Funders Network. We've created this series to provide bite-sized information and stories about how the federal program that supports highways, transit, passenger rail, active transportation, biking and walking got to be the way it is and how we can make it better. This series is for anyone who thinks we deserve a better, safer transportation system that actually gets people where they need to go. We hope to illustrate what's working, what isn't, and talk about how we can change it.
So let's get to our special guest. Today, we're going to talk to Jeff Tumlin. He has extensive experience across the world of transportation, including serving as the Director of Transportation for the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Authority, Strategic Director for Nelson Nygaard, and Interim Director of the Oakland Department of Transportation. And I actually got to meet Jeff back when he was at Nelson Nygaard and was supporting some efforts that we were promoting at SGA at the time to help metropolitan planning organizations bring more performance management into their work, as he had when he was interim director in Oakland. So we invited Jeff because of that hands-on experience at the local level. And in particular, we want to talk about transit, since that was his most recent posting, and how the federal program can support buses and trains, moving people around their communities on a daily basis better than they are today.
And we invited Jeff because in my work with Jeff, where my paths have crossed, he's always been one of the most insightful thinkers, just a really good observer and strategist, and good at explaining what's going on and reframing it in ways that make sense to people. So really excited, Jeff, that you're here.
Do you love just sitting there and having people talk about you?
Bring it on.
So you've been around for a while. Can you give us some context beyond sort of your resume? Talk to us about your experience.
Well, I had the privilege of running the SFMTA from the end of 2019 until the end of 2024. So through the whole COVID period and the extreme economic dislocation that happened in San Francisco as a result of work from home. In addition, during that time, I was the guy at the table when we finally completed both the Central Subway project and the Van Ness Busway, two federally funded projects that went significantly over budget and over schedule. And so I got the opportunity to do the post-processing to figure out what went right, what went wrong, and how do we make sure that we learn the right lessons from both our successes and our failures. So that gave us the ability to rethink our entire project delivery system, everything from contracting to project management to post-project evaluation.
Jeff, are you familiar with Eno's report on how much overlap did you find between their findings of what makes transit projects run over and your experience?
Yeah, I thought the Eno report was spot on. I think as well, the larger policy analysis that's been done by people like Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson in their book Abundance, but particularly Mark Dunkelman's analysis in his book, Why Nothing Works. It was abundantly clear to me that through stapling together 100 good intentions, we have designed a system that makes it impossible for things to work, but also that it is relatively straightforward to redesign that system so that we can once again deliver great projects effectively. And in fact, we've been working on a lot of that at the state level in California, and I think there are some lessons for the federal government from both California's successes and failures that we can point to, as well as the extraordinary work that has happened in places like Spain and in Quebec two jurisdictions that have governance structures rather similar to what we have in the United States, and have shown how quickly one can actually get one's act together and go from being a very poor performer in project delivery to being best in class globally.
Can you give us one example?
Well, I mean, the challenge is that it's the stapling together of 1,000 good intentions. And so if you just solve for one of the problems, it doesn't create a lot of benefit. You really have to untangle the entire knot in order to start seeing results. And I think one example that I can point to in California is rethinking the California Environmental Quality Act. So over a
We're
series,
not the first to say that.
yes, but like if that work had not happened, I would not have been able to get anything done during the pandemic. We striped 50 miles of new transit-only lanes because the California Environmental Quality Act was changed. And specifically, projects that are in the existing street right-of-way and do not increase per capita vehicle miles traveled, those projects are now completely statutorily exempt from CEQA. It meant that I could do a single-page checklist and my CEQA work was done and I could go out and build. Whereas before, I mean, CEQA notoriously halted the San Francisco bike plan for over 5 years. And the CEQA documentation that the city had to produce on its bike plan cost more than implementation of the bike plan itself.
Perfect. What could go wrong in that?
What could go wrong, right? I mean, these are the things that are systematically broken, that your best project manager can't get around. I would also argue similarly that the cost overruns in the Central Subway project were baked into the project through some politically motivated bad decision making about the procurement process well before the project started.
Well, our first question is generally what is not working, or it is what is working at the federal level in terms of supporting transportation. But maybe it's worth taking that question in terms of how it is helpful in addressing these issues.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think everyone will say we're so grateful for the federal money, we wouldn't be able to get anything done without federal funding. So that goes without saying. And most of the process for receiving and spending that money is relatively straightforward. One thing that people may not point out is I love the FTA audit process. The federal government.
It's so nerdy.
No, this is really serious. This is something that I think is undervalued at agencies, particularly when we were fortunate, I think, to have very good auditors who genuinely wanted to help the agency be better. An effective executive, though, can use the federal audit process to accelerate culture change. If there's alignment between what the feds are doing and what the executive wants to do. Because I could make the federal government the boogeyman.
Absolutely.
The federal government, the FTA process was so great at allowing me to, one, discover the odd corners of the agency that needed some light shined on them, because you can't do your job as an executive if there's not light shined into every corner. But more importantly, it gave me the ability to pressure reluctant staff into straightening some things out. So I loved that process. It also helped me in a funny way. Like when I first arrived, there was a lot of culture of sort of fear and blame and hiding problems and fear of being punished if you revealed the problems to the executive. And it took me a long time to disentangle that. It allowed me to demonstrate, the FTA audit process allowed me to demonstrate to staff directly that if staff were completely honest and forthright, if they came forward with the stuff that they knew was not working right, the auditors would be incredibly helpful and kind in helping staff find solutions to those problems and connecting them to peers at other agencies that could also help them solve the problem. So the audit process wasn't punitive; it was really helpful in helping the whole team step it up.
So when we think about the federal transportation program, what's the one thing that you would most want to change? If you had a magic wand, what would you?
I'm going to give you a couple because,
Okay.
again, I think single solutions don't help us get anywhere. So one is absolutely following California's lead in changing NEPA so that projects in the existing street right-of-way are exempt from NEPA. And I don't know, I mean, NEPA is a whole complicated mess. I could go on and on, but let's just start with that. NEPA needs to be part of the solution rather than a key part of the problem, which I would argue it is now. NEPA is harming the environment of the country by making it impossible to do projects that are critically needed in order to address today's environmental problems. The next thing that I would say is a big challenge with federal funding is jurisdictions have to go through all of this work, filling out enormous amounts of paperwork in order to enter a lottery. And you have no way of knowing whether all this work that you put in is going to result in federal funding or not, or if it does result in federal funding, when that manna will rain down from heaven. And so the result of that is it's almost impossible to do systematic capital planning because you have these wild swings of cash. And so if you're lucky and you get a bunch of money and you staff up and you train people how to actually deliver a project properly, when you successfully complete that project, you then need to fire all of your talent. And so the federal process doesn't allow jurisdictions to have a steady amount of money that they can rely upon in order to develop a rational staffing plan and have the right talent that they need in order to be able to deliver. And so one of the things that we would most want is to change the process so it's less, random dropping of money bombs on your jurisdiction and a more collaborative process that engaged with jurisdictions around capital planning. And capital planning, not just for new extensions, but also for the things that we desperately need around state of good repair, particularly for older facilities that have to have a seismic retrofit or a new train control system. At Muni, our train control system is famously loaded every single morning off of a 3.5-inch floppy disk, right? That is the state of transit technology in the United States. And Muni we're right in the middle of the range of datedness of central technology that runs our systems. Like, we're pretty good compared to other jurisdictions.
I think it's really interesting. That was the part of Eno's findings that struck me the most is the cities and the countries that are doing the best in delivering transit projects always have investment going. They're always letting contracts, they're always doing planning, they're always thinking about what we would call big core capacity programs. And so they're able to build those muscles on how to deliver those sorts of capital projects and bake it into their capital planning going forward versus us. We always have a transit project going, but it's never at the same agency. And
that's right.
That means there is no stability of knowledge or approach within any one agency, which brings me to my second point. The whole point of the Transportation Trust Fund is for stability, but it doesn't seem like transit is getting the same sort of stability that we're seeing on the highway side.
Absolutely not. I mean, certainly not for any kind of capacity enhancement or state of good repair. It's completely random, which again really hurts our ability to attract and retain the kind of talent that is needed to deliver projects effectively. It
So,
also makes us more reliant on contractors who, don't are not always interested in delivering projects, on time and on budget.
Jeff, when you talk about the money bombs, is that because so much of this transit expansion and operations are coming out of the discretionary grant pools
That's
versus
exactly
out of
right.
the formula funding streams?
Yeah, I mean, I think for all of us would likely say much more formula funding and a lot less discretion, except for, achieving specific, national goals around, advancing new technology where things, need to be discretionary. It also helps remove the politics from the processes, right? I mean, one of the reasons why the Central Subway project procurement was the way that it was because of the ways in which it was politically driven.
Well, so that might be our third question, is to give an example of the problem in play. Is that an example you'd like to dig into?
So I think that there are, looking in retrospect, I think that there were some missed opportunities in the Central Subway. One was, again, getting back to this kind of FTA audit role, where the federal government could use its power in order to ensure that local jurisdictions were using best practices in everything from project conceptualization to design to procurement to construction to post-project evaluation. So much of the delay and cost overruns in the Central Subway project could have been avoided with the federal government being a partner and helping us have a procurement process that could have allowed us to choose the best contractor rather than a contractor that intentionally underbid, knowing that they could make a fortune in change orders. Right? For a project of that scale, it's impossible to get true 100% design, because as soon as you get underneath the surface, you're going to find 100-year-old utilities that were never mapped properly.
Yep.
Right? I mean, all of the cost overruns for both Central Subway and the Van Ness Busway were because of discovering things underground that nobody could have possibly predicted. And in order to make it through a process like that, you need a contractor who is going to be a solid partner and who will, fairly and collaboratively work through the unknowns. But that requires a procurement process that is thoughtful about risk. And for many municipalities and smaller transit agencies, the procurement people are terrified of risk. But
Yeah.
if you try to get to a contract that is zero risk for the owner, you are going to have astronomical costs because no contractor is going to take on 100% risk.
Right.
So, a key federal role can be learning from global best practices about how best to assign and manage risk. Because, your local procurement team may not be following the global best practices, and they may just be trying to protect themselves, not understanding the risks that creates for the jurisdiction.
I mean, even in terms of national best practices,
Yep.
again, we're spending money every year, but it moves from region to region, and we don't have a process whereby we are helping and not just sharing that information, but truly providing support and training. One of the things we're looking at doing in the next reauthorization is coming up with some funding to support a crew at the federal level that could deploy to any transit agency taking on a project and helping them work through exactly those sorts of issues so that they don't have to make it up on their own every single time.
Yeah, every transit agency CEO would love to have a crew like that is experienced and can be trusted, and who understands, not just the high level theory, but what to do when things get gnarly.
Yeah.
Look, on the ground. Yeah. And I think it's also, I think most of us transit agency CEOs not only, want that free consulting help, but also welcome the right, the right kind of policing role to help us, change things for the better. Because, delivering on a great procurement team, a great project delivery team, that is hard culture change work. It's both skill development, but it's also culture change. And sometimes it's helpful to have an outsider who we can blame to get work done. I was amazed at how it took a little bit of time, but our procurement team at the SFMTA grew and changed so much. Like, I trust them completely now, in part because of the work that we did together, particularly around Muni's new train control system procurement. We used that as the growth and training opportunity, and particularly the opportunity to have a sophisticated look at risk and risk management. And that, I think that, like, talking openly about risk really got our procurement people on board and unlocked their creativity and problem solving abilities, rather than just the defensive approach that they had taken. So yeah, I mean, that looking at a project like the San Francisco train control system procurement, and doing an evaluation of that, as compared to other successful procurements, I think is a great idea. I would also recommend that, if you do put together this team of experts, that you draw on local talent in agencies as well, both because there is expertise, but also because it's an extraordinary growth experience for bureaucrats. People who work, in administrative roles in the office building don't get any of the glory from delivering great projects, but you can't do great projects without great accountants, without great procurement people, without great auditors. So engage them, and agencies, I think, would be eager to to give 25% time of some of their best people, because we know that it's one of the only ways that we can reward the public agency workers who are really central to good delivery.
I love that. Our last question is, how can we make the federal program work better? But I think you've addressed a lot of that on the procurement side. I can't help but, dig in a little deeper on the NEPA issue. And maybe, is there something that the feds could learn from what California is doing with CEQA, or is there something in particular you think needs to happen with NEPA to free transit agencies' hands and local cities' hands to deliver the sorts of projects that will give people an alternative to burning fuel in their car?
So as I mentioned, largely due to the work of Senator Scott Wiener, we've dramatically changed CEQA in California. So any project in the existing street right-of-way that does not result in an increase in per capita vehicle miles traveled is statutorily exempt from any CEQA analysis. So my busway projects in San Francisco, we had a dozen new busways, 50 total miles, that didn't require any CEQA analysis. We converted the Great Highway into a park, no CEQA analysis. We added, I don't even remember, I think 70 miles of slow streets and protected bikeways in San Francisco. Those didn't require any CEQA analysis anymore. And so as a result of that, we were able to shave 2 years off of our projects. And we were able to truly use the quick build process for pretty much everything that we're doing now, because the CEQA and NEPA processes make everything so bogged down and bureaucratic that you can only do the project once. So for our Geary bus rapid transit line, so a 6-mile busway from downtown San Francisco all the way out to the ocean, we did that project quick build style, so that we did the first round just in paint and plastic, and we learned a lot, and ended up changing the design rather significantly before moving into construction in concrete, which is happening, I believe, next year. So taking the environmental process out allowed San Francisco to be incredibly nimble and cost effective. We were also surprised on the Geary project. So on Van Ness, we had a major construction project, put the busway in the middle of a 6-lane road, working fantastically, and we're at 140% of pre-COVID ridership on the 49 Van Ness bus line. We, in the financial collapse, didn't have the ability to do the same treatment on Geary, which was our initial plan. And so we quick built a busway on the curb lane and found it to have about 85% of the speed and reliability benefit at less than 15% of the cost.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was also fundable in our existing resources because we were able to do all of the work with our own crews. And that would not have been possible if we had tried to use federal funding, because the NEPA analysis would have cost more and took longer than the entire project implementation.
That is deserving of an entirely separate conversation about what are we not getting out of NEPA, what analysis are we not getting, and clearly we're getting a lot of stuff we don't need or don't want from it. So when we start that series, we will follow up with you.
Right.
I think there's a lot of interest in that conversation, a lot of trepidation, right? Because NEPA has been sort of what we've had in terms of environmental protection, but acknowledging that it's not working very well. It's not getting us the outcomes that folks want in terms of more sustainable, more equitable transportation systems. Super excited about that conversation.
Well, also, let's be really clear, NEPA is harming the environment when it comes to the critical transportation projects that are essential for dealing with greenhouse gas emission reductions.
I agree. And I don't see it stopping the projects that are driving up greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not stopping projects causing environmental harm, and it is stopping projects that would protect or help the environment. So that sounds like a total fail. And we have to grapple with that if we want to actually address climate and the environment.
This has been such a great conversation, but I think we're at time. So, Jeff, we're going to thank you, and we will figure out how to continue this conversation, because the issues that you've raised, NEPA, project delivery, sustainable funding, procurement, so many really important issues. So, thank you.
Thank you both.
I continuously hear that we are not building the sorts of skill we need to deliver transit projects well. And I think Jeff did such a good job of digging into the mechanics of why that is so. But I love how he not only points out the problem, he is always looking for that solution. And figuring out where the federal government can be supportive of people like him trying to make systems and culture change and sustain it is at the crux of so much that we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I love his reminder that as much as we would love a single solution, there is no single solution. This is all complex and interrelated, and you need to be thinking about it on many, many different levels. This is a chess game, not checkers.
Absolutely. I think different levels of government need to be in conversation with each other. It's not, We're not going to see all the solutions bubble up from tens of thousands of different localities evenly or effectively, nor are we going to have one solution come from above. And so there's going to have to be a lot of interplay between them, and particularly plucking out the folks who are the most successful at making that change.
Yeah, and I think it is increasingly clear that it's that change happening at a local level and a state level that has the most potential. These are the folks who are on the ground, forced to grapple with reality and making change actually on the ground, not high-level policy and hopes and dreams and ideology that we see, I think, a lot of, but actually, how do you solve problems and get stuff done in your communities?
Well, I have some fun facts on SFMTA, which is the agency that Jeff managed. It is one of the only transportation agencies in the US that manages transit, streets, parking, traffic signals, taxis, and bike lanes all in one agency, which I think leads to the sort of thoughtful, holistic thinking that we heard from Jeff. They operate the largest fleet of electric trolley buses. They're responsible for the iconic cable cars. And they, in managing parking, launched SF Park, which is one of the first dynamic pricing programs in the US, adjusting parking meter rates based on demand.
The wheels of transportation keep rolling, and so do we. So catch you next time.
See you then.